Okay, so I have about 10 or 12 slides here, and we just basically, the idea is that the Old Testament has a lot of information and history and different nations and different eras and a lot of different things. So, like growing up in the Sunday school world, we always hear things like one story that's taken from somewhere, and we know the stories, but like it's very helpful to once in a while get an overview of the whole Old Testament and put everything like in a bit of an order. So even though you guys know most of these things individually, like the point of today is to have an overview and put it all in order. So we divided the whole Old Testament into 10 historical periods, and there's basically going to be like, it's going to say like number 1, this is like the first period, the creation, fall period. And then also, I guess like just because I was thinking like when we're halfway through the presentation or whatever, we might forget like what was like number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. So I just printed out the slides. So whenever we finish a slide, like I can give it to one of you guys. You could just pin it on the board, because I think we can do like 5 here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then just it might be helpful later on. So like I'll give you to pin them in. There's like pins over there.
So like after the slide, you go in?
Yeah. I'll pass them to you. Okay, so in the beginning, so the first thing it's always going to say timeline. These are come on like approximate dates, but just like more or less. Okay. Genesis 1 to 11, the first 11 chapters of the Bible speak about, there's, like I'll put all of them together. So there's the creation, and where God creates everything in 6 days, and on the 7th day He rests, and He teaches us this concept of the Sabbath from the very beginning. And then, like, so it's, afterwards there's the fall of Adam and Eve. And sorry, before I talk about the creation, by the way, if you notice, like this is one of the biggest timeline gaps. Like it's a really big period of time. It's like 1,750 years or something like that. And all of that is only in 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, you know. It makes you wonder, because once you get to Genesis chapter 12 and it starts speaking about Abraham, it slows down tremendously, and it starts to be like slower, because now it's talking about the covenant that God makes with the human being. And so the reason I'm mentioning this is that it's really important always to remember that the Bible was not made to be like a history book. It's not intended to be like a science book. I mean, it's not intended to like explain every detail of the creation. And some people ask like, why does the Bible not mention anything about the other planets, for example, like the whole universe, like all the other planets and stuff like that? And the reason is that the purpose of the whole book is about God's covenant with man, and man is like the central figure, his central creation, yani the one that he loves, and he puts all his affection on the human being. And the rest of it really doesn't matter much, like it's not relevant to the story, you know. And even all the details of creation, like as we said, it's not meant to be a science book, that's why they go fast, and then they slow down at Genesis 12. So God creates everything, and He sees man that He is very good. And then there's the fall with Adam and Eve, so it starts to like, this is the first instance of like human pride, where the human beings decide like we don't want to follow God anymore, basically, but we want to like follow our own desires. Like this is the first showing of pride. And then Adam and Eve, you know, they get kicked out of the garden, they start living, as you guys know, and then like soon afterwards, Cain kills Abel and all that stuff. And after about, I think there's like about 10 generations between Adam and Eve and Noah or something like that. I'm not good with like these things, but eventually Noah comes. And in those 10 generations, man, like the humanity becomes very corrupt once again, and they're all like fighting with each other, killing each other. Like it becomes really, really awful. So God starts and makes a new beginning with Noah, another covenant. So like I'd like to think of like Adam and Eve as like the first covenant, because like He kind of gave them the rules, He gave them like the agreement, and they all live together happily. And then Noah would be like, I guess, the second one, where he tries to start again. And then after a little bit of time that passes, there's again the Tower of Babel story where like again like the human pride part comes up. They try to build a really giant tower, just the purpose of it so that everyone would say like how great they are, and that they can reach up to the heavens. And that's when God confuses their languages, and that it starts like the nations starts from that point on. So, so of course, we mentioned the flood and everything. And by the way, like I'm not going to go into that because it's not our subject, but like every single story and everything, single thing, like there's a lot of meditations that can be done about Taban, the church, and the flood, and the ark, and all of that stuff, and about Christ. All of these can be like types of Christ, but that's not the purpose. So, yeah, I'll just give you the first one to do. So that's the first era. And then, as I said, the second one starts pretty much Genesis chapter 12. So we'll do Genesis 12 to 50. This is like the time of the patriarchs, the fathers that are known as like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know, the big three. And there's a very like cheesy little drawing on the side of Abraham. They all look exactly the same. So it's like copy and paste. But yeah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, Abraham, yeah, by the way, just wanted to mention that Abraham, like, the story of Job, also they say that it was like, Job probably lived in the same time as Abraham. Like, they're not exactly sure, but most scholars say that they're contemporaries of one another, just so you can know where Job comes in. And then, God takes Abraham and starts, he makes a big covenant with him. And he promises him that he will give him land, because at this point Abraham is like a nomad and he like travels around. And he promises him that his offspring will be like the sand of the sea and the stars of the sky. I always mix up the two. And and there's even some like hints about the Messiah coming in from him. So this is why it slows down from here, because it's very important that he makes the covenant with him. And then his son Isaac, he was born in his old age, according to the promise. And his name means laughter. Isaac's name means laughter because Sarah laughed when he was born, or when she was about to give birth to him, her old age. And then there's Jacob, who also received the name Israel. Jacob in the beginning was a deceitful man, and he wasn't like straightforward. And by the end of his life, God worked with him and changed him, and he was given a new name, Israel. And he is known as the father of, so the 12 tribes of Israel are basically the 12, the offspring of Jacob, or Israel. And I'll just go to this thing quickly. This is just so you can understand where the 12 tribes come from. So Jacob had 2 wives. First he fell in love with Rachel, as you know, but they tricked him into marrying Leah first. So in the end he ended up marrying Leah, and then a week later he married Rachel, but he had to serve another 7 years. So anyways, he was married to both of them, and she was barren for a long time. So she started having all these kids, and she also gave, anyways, it doesn't matter. In the end, Rachel didn't have kids, so she told her servant to like marry Jacob as well. And so 2 kids here, and then some, it was like a competition, like who can have more kids, basically. And in the end, these are the 12, like if you count these, there's like 6 here, 2, 2, and 2. And this is like Joseph is wearing his colored coat, as you can see in this diagram. So this is Joseph and Benjamin. The tribes that are like maybe most important to remember are going to be like Joseph, Benjamin, and Judah, because like Christ comes from the lineage of Judah. Okay? Yeah. And very quickly, Joseph ends up, like the reason that this era connects God to the next era, how does the Abraham and sons period connect to the Moses era? It's through Joseph. So we have Abraham and sons. Next we're going to Moses. Alright. The connection is through Joseph, because as you know, they sold Joseph to Egypt, and he lived there and became successful and whatever. But then there was a famine in this land that they were living in, which is, I guess, like the land of Canaan at that time. They were starting to dwell there. there was a famine, so eventually Joseph saves all of Egypt and basically like even saves his own family because they leave their hometown and they go to Egypt. So that's how the Moses story happens here. Is that the Moses story happens that like all of the descendants of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, because they're hungry and there's no food, whatever, they all move to Egypt and they live with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh and Joseph, like they hook them up and everybody's happy. But then they start to multiply so fast that Pharaoh gets afraid and scared and he says like, man, these people are going to take over. So he has to like stop it, you know. So he starts to enslave them and do all that stuff. Yeah. Maybe I'll give you these two. But maybe I might need to start like from here. So it could fit.
I can do like a diagonal thing.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the third period is Moses and Exodus. Where is it covered in the Bible? Basically, in the book of Exodus. So the last thing that ends Genesis chapter 50 is like the end of the Joseph story. And then Exodus begins, you know, the story of Moses. And then Exodus means like to leave a place, yani, so, or to exit from somewhere, or to move from one place to another. So it's covered in Exodus, in the book of Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means like to repeat a second time, basically. So like here it repeats most of what was happening. And Leviticus, which is not here, is because Leviticus is like a specific book about like the laws given to the Levites or the priests of the time. So the main events in this era is basically like the calling of Moses, you know, Moses, his story and how he grows up in Pharaoh's house, but at some point he identifies himself more with his own people than with the Egyptians. And then there's he escapes and all that. And then there's the burning bush story when he's 80 years old. So he lives 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the desert, just as a like quiet shepherd. And then when he's 80 years old, that's when God starts working with him. He tells him, like, you're ready now. And he starts working with him. There's the 10 plagues that we know very well, and they exit Egypt, Exodus. And there's also like the Passover story is right at the Exodus, and the Passover has a lot of symbols of Christ. And then when they leave Ba'af, they're in the wilderness for a period of 40 years. And that's the time, like, in the wilderness, like, that Moses goes up the mountain and receives the law and all of that stuff. And he gets, like, the 10 Commandments in the law, and that's when they build the golden calf when he's up there on the mountain. And 40 years in the wilderness, like, they were just wandering because of, like, a lack of faith, because they could have gotten there very, very quickly. It wouldn't even have taken a few months, you know, or a few weeks. Like, it was a short travel distance, but they were just, like, going in circles because they weren't ready to enter the promised land. You know, when they sent out the spies, they didn't believe God that He would deliver them. Anyways, they ended up wandering for 40 years, and that's when the manna they were being fed with the manna from the heavens, which was also a symbol of, like, you know, the bread of life, when Christ said the bread of life. And they had the Ark of the Covenant, like a container that contained a few items, some like the manna and a rod of Aaron, and a few things, the 3 things. What else did it contain? The what? So the rod of Aaron will manna, one more thing at least. I don't know. Can't remember right now. No? Oh, yeah, the 2 tablets. Yeah, that's like the main one. Okay. So that's the third. Oh yeah, and then how does it transition back into the fourth? Is that very simply, Moses Moses makes a mistake, and God tells him, like, because of what you've done, like, you're not going to enter the promised land, you will only see it. And so he dies. And then Joshua, who was one of the spies that was sent, one of the 2 spies that was faithful, him and Caleb, Joshua is the one who becomes the leader after Moses, and he takes them into the promised land. So they cross over the Jordan, just like the Red Sea, but this time it's through the Jordan. And they enter into Jericho, and you know the story of Jericho, where they go around 7 times. Like, they go for 7 days once every day, and then the last time they go around 7 times, and the walls of Jericho fall. And then this begins back, like, the conquest period, because, like, for 7 years they're basically conquering land. Like this is the land that God had promised to deliver to them, yani. So he asks them to basically wipe out all the nations that are there. And we've spoken about this a lot through like yani Medhat gave many topics about it, explaining why God asks him to wipe out these nations, and that it's not that these nations like didn't mean anything to God. Actually, he had given them 400 years and like to repent and given them chances to try to change their ways, but they had gotten to a level of like yani not being bearable. So he told them like destroy everything, don't leave anything, because if you leave something there, they're going to influence you. Like their evil ways are going to yani change you. They're going to influence you. So, but they didn't really like listen, and they still kept like a few pockets of people and a few different things here and there, and it did influence them negatively, and they started to do like the people in the land. So they settled in the land, and I don't know, I didn't bring a map, but there's like, basically if you look at the map, like you'll see the 12 tribes of Israel, everybody has like their section. Okay. So, not very interesting page, but good. And then, after Joshua, and when they're all settled in the land, it's important to mention that when it starts the period of the judges. So now we have the judges. I put a picture of Samson like wrestling with the lion. So the period of the judges, I just want to mention very quickly that notice now that they're settled in the land flowing with milk and honey and it's very comfortable and all that, this is when like they start to go downhill a lot, because typically speaking, like it's very common in human nature that when you become comfortable and when you like the comfort and the luxury is one of the problems that led them to start like being far from God. And the other one was mixing with others. Like God told them don't keep any of these people alive, whatever, and he also told them don't mix with any other nation, but they disobeyed both and they started mixing with other nations. So that's when like things started to go downhill. So this is like, there's a period of about 300 years or so, a bit more. This is in the book of Judges. Okay, so now they're in the promised land. Their first 300 years of history is basically 7 cycles. There are 7 cycles of, like the cycle, the reason it's called a cycle is that it always goes through this order. So they, first they're comfortable, whatever, luxury, what I said, and then they start to sin, they start to be very far from God, and then because of that, God sends them like harassment from other nations, and the people that they didn't destroy or whoever other people that are around, and they start to be in bondage to these others. And so they really like cry out to the Lord, and they say like, yeah, we've sinned, like it's like a type of repentance, but in reality they're just like sorrow and they're crying. And then he delivers them through one of the judges. He sends them one of the judges. There are about like 12 to 15 judges, depending on if you count like Eli and Samuel, stuff like that. So he sends them judges. Just to tell you that in those 7 cycles, if you're interested to know like who the oppressors were, it was Mesopotamians, Moabites, Philistines, Canaanites, Midianites, Ammonites, then the Philistines again. So that's like the order of the 7. And some of the famous judges, like that, just so you can relate to some of them, like we never remember their names, but these are the famous ones: Deborah, Gideon, Samson, and then Eli was the one before Samuel, and then Samuel. Samuel was the last judge, and he helps us transition from the period of the judges to the period of the kings. So, basically, Samuel, the story of Samuel is really, really nice. Like he's desperately like needed in this time, because Eli and his sons were very corrupt, as you guys know, and all that. And so, like Israel was going through a really, really bad time spiritually and morally and everything like that. And then Samuel was born to Hannah. She was barren, and she cried to the Lord and told him, like, if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to you his whole life. And truly, she got a child, and she dedicated, not like dedicated means like like she actually gave him to Eli the priest to live with him there, and she only saw him once a year. Like she would go and see him once a year and give him like a new tunic, and then she would go home. We wouldn't see each other. There was no cell phones or whatever. So it's a big sacrifice. But he was like amazing. He really like did some awesome things. He was a judge who was like without fault, almost, so to speak. Like I don't think the Bible like mentions anything about his faults or whatever. And he's the last judge. But at that time, the people started saying, "Hey, why are we the only nation without a king? We need a king. We don't have a king." And then Samuel was very offended and told them, like, "Why are you saying that? God is our king. We don't need an earthly king." But they said, "Yeah, but we want to be like the others," basically. Like in simple English, they said, like, all the other nations have a king and we want to be like everyone else, so that like the king can walk before us in pride, and we can have like, marching army. Like it was all, again, human pride, basically. So he was upset, and God was also a bit upset, but he told them, "They have not rejected you, they have rejected me." And so God tells Samuel, "Okay, anoint for them a king." So, did I give you 5, right?
No.
Oh, sorry, put it back in. Thank you very much. So this takes us to the era of the kings. Where can we find it in Scripture? 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. 1 Samuel covers. Let me put up the. There's not a lot of stuff here to say yet. 1 Samuel covers Saul and David, before David's kingdom starts, but like David starts to be king from 2 Samuel, and then Solomon also. So there are only 3 kings. Like this is the history of Israel, basically. There are only 3 kings where it's under the United Kingdom. I guess we can call it United Kingdom because it's like there's only one kingdom of Israel at this point. The Jews, the Hebrews are all like under the kingdom of Israel. And Samuel anoints the first king, Saul. He starts off good, but he ends badly. And then David comes. And like I just want you to notice that like most of the problems in this whole thing is related to pride. Like I myself noticed it when I was preparing this. Like when I kept on looking through like the different points, I was like, every time there's like a big problem, it's because of human pride, and it's not a coincidence. It's because like the fall began with pride. Satan himself fell out of pride, and then he tried to like seduce human beings to like go after their ego. So it's like not a coincidence. That's the human problem, is that we are unable to submit to a higher power. We are unable to submit to God sometimes, and we want to be our own king here, or be in control. So just to notice, because Saul started off very good when he was small in his own eyes, and then when he became like arrogant to God, then he started to disobey God and started doing wrong things. And then there was David, and it says that David was a man after God's own heart. And if you think of it, David also sinned, just like others, 2 very big sins. But the point is that he had a heart after God's own heart. He was like lowly, humble. He always remained small in his own eyes. All the way up to the end of his story, you could see signs of humility in his life. You could see signs of submission and signs of like prayer. He was always connected to God. He was like on the same wavelength. He wrote the Psalms, and he was also like until today the Jews dream of a kingdom like the kingdom of David. They wish that one day they can have like a kingdom like they had with King David and King Solomon to a certain extent. And then we have Solomon, who was like the richest, wisest king, but like at the end also he started to turn after other gods because he married so many women and they were from other nations, so they turned his heart away from God. And after Solomon, like when Solomon was in his old age and he was dying, he kind of said who would be king after him, like one of his sons. His name was Rehoboam, right? Rehoboam? Jeroboam. Oh yeah. Yeah, his name was like the one that he like said should be king is Rehoboam, but I'll get to the other guy in a second, Jeroboam as well. Oh yeah, okay. So I'll give you this easy one. Start with the next line. This part starts to get like a bit more intense, but it's very interesting. Like this is the part where maybe you might not know everything. Like I think you guys knew most of the stuff. So the divided kingdom period, like if you notice here, like it says Israel here, and then Judah here. So the capital, sorry, I didn't press next. Now they start fighting with each other. Like as soon as Solomon dies, there are basically there's Israel and Judah. Like, let's start with Israel. There's civil war. That means there's again a war between 10 tribes who were led by King Jeroboam, which is like, he had a lot of power, and he was able to like win the 10 tribes, and then Judah had 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And I guess it was called Judah because like it's also like location-wise, the capital Jerusalem was like in the area where like the tribe of Judah lived, and then the northern king. So 10 tribes led by King Jeroboam. It's called the Northern Kingdom. The capital is in Samaria. Samaria is like right here. You can't see it. This is Samaria. And then there were 20 kings, like after the 3 that we talked about, after Saul, David, and Solomon. There were 20 kings. All of them were evil. All 20 of them. And they had these prophets who were like trying to warn the people, like if you don't repent, if you don't change your ways, you will be kaza kaza kaza. Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Hosea, and probably others, but these are the main ones. Judah, on the other hand, like was the southern kingdom. It was led by King Rehoboam, and the capital is Jerusalem. It's here. They're not so far, like the 2 capitals. Samaria is here, and Jerusalem is here. There were 12 evil kings and 8 good kings. So because of these 8 good kings, they lasted, Judah lasted longer before going into captivity. I'll get to that in a minute. But the main prophets were Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Micah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. Yeah. Sorry to make you get up.
Little harder.
So after the divided kingdom period, like that was also like, it was really sad. Yeah, I want to also tell you something about the kingdom thing. So if you notice the judges, or like David and Solomon, like the intention, even when God appointed a king for them, it wasn't so much like the way we think of kings now as like separation of state and religion. Like it wasn't like the reason that now we need separation of state and religion, definitely for sure, is because there's already like secularization that happens. So you can't have a king, like you can't have religion and the state working together if the state aslan is not like, of the same religion. But the people of Israel, it's very different because they're all one nation. It's like they're all one religion, first of all. And the king, his role was not only to be like going to battle and whatever, but he actually had a spiritual role as well. His role was to lead the people spiritually. He would even like King David, he prayed about like which wars he should go into and he should conquer, and God would tell him like, go against them, don't go against them, So it was actually like the intention was for the king to be the spiritual leader of the nation as well, But as we said, the 20 kings that were evil and all that, like they were terrible, like they were so awful that they would cause the people to worship idols and to do all sorts of despicable things. And because of that, God, he sent them many prophets and many warnings, and they didn't listen. So now there was the captivity or the exile period. So there are 2. Let me just put them up. First, it was Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. They were exiled to Assyria in 722 BC. So the 10 tribes. And until today, like you'll hear the term the 10 lost tribes, because these people, the 10 tribes, were literally like wiped out from history. Like they're not they dissolved in Assyria somehow, and nobody really knows like what happened to these 10 tribes. Like they're dissolved, they're gone,
I think
sorry?
did their research and they found out they went somewhere in Africa. Like I was listening to something
Yeah.
called that.
Yeah, I think there's.
the Ark Covenant, I think, with them, something like this. Yeah,
Ethiopia. Yeah, so like I've heard like a few different theories. Like I guess everybody's like, you know, they talk about like where, like I don't, has it been like proven like where they are? Because I don't think it's
We just
like
have a
still.
small church in Ethiopia that says Ark is there. And no one knows.
Yeah. So it's very much like, yeah, but it's kind of sad. Like if you think of it, even when we talk about Jewish people today, we're talking about like a very small remnant of people. Yet 10 tribes of the 12 are like wiped out entirely. You know. And then these are the prophets as well. Yani, these people spoke even when they were in the Assyrian captivity. They like, spoke to the people like. And then the southern kingdom of Judah, they lasted a little bit longer because this is BC, right? So this is like first, then 150 years or whatever later. And also their prophets, you know, Jeremiah and Habakkuk, Ezekiel, they were telling them like, be careful, like if we don't change our ways, what happens to the northern kingdom of Israel is going to happen to us. They kept on warning them as well, and they didn't really listen, and in the end they ended up like doing even worse. And just like so they were exiled to Babylon. So you know the stories of Daniel and all that stuff. King Nebuchadnezzar was the one that took the exile. This is the southern kingdom. And also, this, by the way, is also related to a promise that God made to King David. That he told King David that I'm always going to leave someone on the throne for you. Like, your throne will continue on forever. So always one of your sons will continue on. So that's why, even though even though the 10 tribes were lost, like you notice that the tribe of Judah still remained, and Christ came eventually from the tribe of Judah, and his throne like lasts forever. So it's, and by the way, the Babylonians eventually took over what the Assyrians had taken as well. And then there's the return from captivity period. So this is a little bit related to Nehemiah, Arise and Build, and our theme. I'll show you guys now. So the return from captivity is covered in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. It's not Esther is not about the return, but it's about she's still in that era because she was living in Persia at the time. But, and she her story is there, but it's not related to the return from captivity. So there are 3 groups that returned. The first return was led by Zerubbabel. He was a governor, 538 BC. To King Cyrus was a king of Persia, Prince of Persians and stuff like that, that stuff. So King Cyrus, miraculously, King Cyrus allowed them, although they're captives, he allowed them to go back and rebuild their own, build Jerusalem again, build their temple, as long as they pay taxes and all that. The super cool thing about all this is that Isaiah the prophet, who lived 200-300 years before. How many years did I write that down? No, but I think he lived two centuries earlier, approximately 2 centuries earlier. In Isaiah 44:28, he prophesies, he predicts that there's going to be a king, Cyrus. He actually mentions the name Cyrus 2 centuries before. Imagine how cool that is, that his name is actually written, and he doesn't just say there's going to be a king who's going to allow them to rebuild, but he writes his name. It's in Isaiah 44:28, if anybody wants to read it. And he allows people to return, but sadly, sadly, like very few people return. Like there's a small percentage of people that return. The others are like, no, like we're good here, thank you, we're fine, you know. So it's very sad that after all this, only a few return. The second wave is led by Ezra. Ezra the priest. And he's under, like, there's a new king now, his name is King Artaxerxes. So it takes them like about, I think, 80 years or something like that to rebuild a second temple. It's called, the second temple is known as the Temple of Zerubbabel. So the first temple is the temple of who? Like the first temple is the Temple of Solomon. The second temple is the Temple of Zerubbabel. And nowadays, like if you hear on YouTube when the Jews speak about what they want to build, they say we want to build the third temple. Like that's what it is. Because there's only Temple of Solomon. It was destroyed by all this the captivity stuff. And then they started rebuilding the temple here again. And then the third group of people went with Nehemiah. Like these guys were like living in the same time. He goes back and he focuses on rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, and they do it in 52 days, as you know.
What's so special about those temples? Why to distinguish them out of all the other temples?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it was part of their religion, that like they cannot offer sacrifices anywhere except at the temple of Jerusalem. Like only in Solomon's temple could they like offer up animal sacrifices and do certain prayers and do all of their rituals and their priests and whatever. It could only be done in Jerusalem. So even the people that lived far away, because the 12 tribes of Israel, and they were living like, some of them were pretty far from Jerusalem, like they couldn't just build their own like temple or build their own whatever. So even today, you notice like the Jews don't have temples anymore because the second temple even has been destroyed. They only have synagogues. Like they use the word synagogue means like, I don't know if it's a gema, but like it's basically a place where you just meet together. There's no more animal sacrifices now. There's no more like the same kind of worship that they used to do in. So it's really, really important. Like without the temple, like the people of Israel are nothing without their temple. Like it's the most important thing for them. And that's why until today, they're hoping to rebuild the third temple like in whatever way possible, if they can. And finally, the last prophets that are mentioned in the Old Testament, or speak in this final portion, is Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And then, I'll just give you this. So there's only one more stage. The last stage, I guess, is like not covered much in like after those prophets that I'm talking about, and that's like the end of the Old Testament. There's 400 years, like so from 400 BC until Christ is born. It's called like the time of silence, or the silence period, because there are no more prophets that are being sent. There's no more like messages coming in, look at that, and the people feel that God has left them, or like there's no more, nothing for 400 years, and then John the Baptist is like the first prophet in like that time, and Christ comes, right after him. So there's no anointed prophet or king. And yeah, by the way, when we say the returns, they returned, but they're not allowed to have a king anymore. Like they're still like, they returned, but they're still being ruled by the Persians. That doesn't mean like they can have their own king and they're independent. They're not independent. They don't have freedom. They're still under the rule, but like they're allowed to like build whatever, build the country. So they don't have a king. They don't have a prophet. Persia is still in power. Until the year 330, Alexander the Great shows up, and in 7 years, basically, he takes over like the whole world at that time. And it's like a very quick taking over, but as soon as he leaves, like his kingdom breaks up into like all his governors. Also, that's by the way, there's prophecies for all of that in the Bible. There's prophecies about Alexander the Great, and that his kingdom would be divided, but not among his sons. So it's divided among his army leaders. It's like in Daniel 11, 12, and the two canonical books. After Alexander the Great, so the whole world becomes Greek and stuff like that. Hellenization and Greek philosophers. So the Greek philosophies start to come up a lot in that time. And Hellenization is that some of the Jews actually started to adopt the ideas of the Greeks very, very much. They like welcomed them, and some Jews rejected them very much and said like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is not us. But like a lot of them became Hellenized, or became like, they took on the Greek culture like a little too much. And at that time, all they had was like that the Jewish rabbis, they would write writings, and there were sects of the Jewish, like, so, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all that stuff, and it comes from this period of time as well. Is that the sects means like, what's another word for sects? Like groups or
denominations?
Yeah, you could say basically almost like denominations of Judaism at that time. And then there's something I really don't know very much about. Like, I tried to like research this period of time in history, and I'm always like super confused. But like, I don't know if anybody's like good at this area and you want to explain it. But there's basically an empire called the Seleucid Empire, and there's like Ptolemy, and there's war between like a part of Syria and Egypt. I don't know.
When Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was split into four between his four commanders.
Yeah.
Army commanders. One of them was the Seleucid Empire. One of them was the Ptolemaic. There was two others there. The Ptolemaic was the one in Egypt.
Yeah.
The Seleucid was the one in Syria.
Okay.
They were always fighting for power.
Yeah.
So these were the divisions of the.
Okay, that's great. It's simpler than I thought. So so this is like the after Alexander the Great, saying that like his governors or his generals like had different empires, and then like they fought with each other. And like the land, if you look at the maps, like they keep on moving from one to another. And then there was a brief period of Jewish independence. So there was like some Jewish people who like started rioting or started like doing an uprising for their freedom. And it's related back to the book of Maccabees, that is led by a man named Judas Maccabee, and that's in the Deuterocanonical books. And then after that, in the year 63, and the Maccabees, by the way, is related to, like the winning of their freedom, whatever. When they like became free, as like they had Jewish independence, they were able to go back to the temple, I believe. And they cleansed the temple. And when they did that, like that's related to Hanukkah. When they celebrate Hanukkah and they put the candles, the menorah, like it's actually related to like this era of the Maccabees, and when they like regained their freedom, they cleansed the temple once again or something like that. So it's please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. This was like educational for me because I'm not like a very good history person, So. And then in the year 63, Rome takes over the world. Everything becomes like Roman Empire in that area of the world. Then the last thing let me see if we have time. 9:45. Okay. So there's a 7-minute video. Like, first of all, this diagram is very good. Like, just keep one. So there's a 7-minute video of a guy that kind of summarizes the Old Testament a little bit. Like the diagram I think is excellent. It's a very good diagram. The video, like what I don't like about it is that the pictures are really like retarded. Like they're really silly. Like they're almost like embarrassing. I don't want to show it just because of the pictures, but like at the same time, like it's the best thing we can get in 7 minutes as a summary of everything we said. So I think I'll just show it anyways. If you can like turn off the camera if it's still going, and then because it's like a video. Just giving you an introduction. Good job. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Do you feel like it was like helpful to put things into perspective, or it was more confusing? Yeah. Good. Okay. Say a prayer and